What happens when Hollywood royalty meets British television royalty and the collision creates the most explosive talk show moment in recent memory? In just 37 seconds, a single comment about authenticity would transform a seemingly routine celebrity interview into a career-defining catastrophe that left audiences gasping and industry insiders scrambling for damage control. Before we dive into this jaw-dropping encounter that nobody saw coming, make sure to hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments what you think really happened behind the scenes. Trust me, you're going to want to share your thoughts on this one. Picture this. The iconic red chair spins around on the Norton show, that beloved Friday night staple where celebrities come to laugh, share stories, and promote their latest projects in the most relaxed setting on television. Norton, the master of wit and charm, has built his reputation on making even the most guarded stars feel comfortable enough to let their hair down. His infectious laugh and genuine curiosity have created countless memorable moments over the years. But on this particular evening, something felt different from the moment the cameras started rolling. The atmosphere in the studio carried an unusual tension, like the calm before a storm, that everyone could sense but nobody could quite pinpoint. Meghan Markle swept onto the set with all the confidence of someone accustomed to commanding attention. Dressed impeccably and wearing a smile that seemed perfectly practiced, she settled into the famous red chair with the poise of someone who had conquered every room she'd ever entered. The studio audience offered their usual warm welcome, applauding politely as Graham prepared to work his magic. Well, Graham began with his trademark grin. We have royalty in the house tonight, don't we? How lovely to have you here. Meghan's smile widened, but there was something calculated about it. Something that suggested she was already 3 moves ahead in a game that Graham didn't yet realize they were playing. Thank you so much for having me, Graham. I've been looking forward to this for weeks. Your show is such an institution. The compliment rolled off her tongue smoothly, but seasoned talk show watchers might have detected the subtle emphasis on certain words, the way she seemed to be auditioning even while appearing relaxed. Graham, ever the professional, launched into his usual rhythm of gentle probing and playful banter. He asked about her latest projects, her transition from acting to advocacy, the usual celebrity interview territory that should have been safe ground for everyone involved. So tell us about this new documentary you're producing, Graham said, leaning forward with genuine interest. It sounds absolutely fascinating. Oh, it really is, Meghan replied, her voice taking on that particular cadence that suggested she was about to deliver a carefully rehearsed talking point. You know, Graham, I think what people don't understand is how important it is to use your platform for good. Not everyone gets that opportunity, and I feel a real responsibility to shine a light on issues that matter. The studio audience nodded approvingly, but Graham's expression shifted slightly. Years of interviewing had given him an almost supernatural ability to detect when someone was performing rather than conversing. Absolutely, he agreed diplomatically, though I imagine it must be quite a change from your acting days. Different kind of performance, isn't it? The word performance hung in the air for just a moment too long. Meghan's smile flickered, barely perceptible to most viewers but unmistakable to someone with Graham's experience reading people. I wouldn't call it a performance, she said, her tone cooling by several degrees. What I'm doing now is authentic work. Real work that makes a difference in people's lives. Graham raised an eyebrow, sensing the shift in energy, but not quite sure what had triggered it. The audience remained blissfully unaware that they were witnessing the opening moves of what would soon become an unforgettable confrontation. Of course, Graham said smoothly, trying to navigate back to safer waters. I didn't mean to suggest otherwise. It's just interesting how people reinvent themselves, isn't it? I mean, look at me. Started as a comedian. Now I'm asking celebrities awkward questions for a living. The self-deprecating humor that usually diffused any tension seemed to have the opposite effect. Meghan's posture straightened, and her media-trained smile became even more rigid. I think there's a difference between reinventing yourself and finally being able to show who you really are, she said, each word carefully enunciated. Some of us have always been authentic. We've just been waiting for the right platform to express that authenticity. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Graham's years of experience kicked in, and he could feel the interview sliding into dangerous territory. But like a master sailor navigating choppy waters, he tried to steer toward calmer seas. Well, authenticity is certainly something your fans appreciate about you, he offered, attempting to find common ground. But Meghan wasn't interested in common ground. She had apparently decided that this was her moment to make a statement, and nothing was going to stop her from delivering it. My fans understand that I've never been anything but authentic, she said, her voice rising just enough to make the studio audience shift uncomfortably in their seats. Unlike some people in this industry who put on different faces depending on who they're talking to, the comment landed like a bomb in the cozy confines of the Graham Norton Show studio. Graham's eyebrows shot up, and for the first time in years, he seemed genuinely taken aback by a guest's behavior. "I'm sorry, are you suggesting that other people aren't being genuine?" he asked, his voice maintaining its pleasant tone, even as his eyes showed he was recalibrating his entire approach to the interview. "I'm not suggesting anything," Meghan replied with a smile that could have cut glass. "I'm stating a fact. There are people in this business who say one thing in private and another thing when the cameras are rolling. People who pretend to be your friend, and then—" She trailed off, but the implication hung heavy in the air, like smoke from a fire that was just beginning to spread. Graham Norton had interviewed thousands of celebrities over his career, from A-list movie stars having public meltdowns to politicians caught in scandals, but he had never encountered anything quite like this. The woman sitting across from him seemed determined to turn his lighthearted chat show into a personal courtroom, and he was apparently both judge and defendant. "Well," Graham said, his voice still carrying that trademark warmth but now edged with something sharper, "I think most people in television understand that we all wear different hats depending on the situation. That's not being fake, that's just being professional." Meghan's laugh was anything but amused. It was the kind of sound that made everyone in the studio audience wonder if they should keep clapping or start looking for the exits. "Professional?" she repeated, as if the word tasted bitter in her mouth. "Is that what we're calling it now? Because where I come from, we call that being two-faced." The gasps from the audience were audible now. This wasn't playful celebrity banter anymore. This was something else entirely, something that felt dangerous and unpredictable. Graham's production team in the control room were probably having heart attacks, but the veteran host maintained his composure with the skill of someone who had navigated countless tricky interviews. "I think you might be misunderstanding how television works," Graham said gently, trying one more time to de-escalate the situation. "We're all here to have a good time and give the audience something entertaining. That's the whole point of the show." "Entertaining?" Meghan said, her voice dripping with disdain. "Right. So you want me to sit here and pretend everything is wonderful while you ask me silly questions about my favorite color or what I had for breakfast?" "I was actually going to ask about your charity work," Graham replied, and there was the slightest hint of steel in his voice now. "But if you'd prefer to talk about breakfast, we can certainly do that." The audience chuckled nervously, clearly unsure whether they should be laughing or holding their breath. Graham's gentle sarcasm was his way of trying to remind everyone, including his increasingly hostile guest, that this was supposed to be fun. But Meghan was having none of it. She shifted in the red chair, her body language becoming more aggressive by the second. "You know what, Graham? I think your audience deserves better than the usual celebrity puff piece. They deserve to hear some truth for once." "Truth about what exactly?" Graham asked. And now his patience was beginning to show signs of strain. 20 years of hosting had taught him how to handle difficult guests, but this was rapidly moving beyond difficult into something approaching sabotage. "Truth about how this industry really works," Meghan said, her voice rising. "Truth about how people like you sit in your comfortable chairs and make jokes while real issues are ignored. Truth about how some of us are actually trying to make a difference, while others are just collecting paychecks and pretending to care." The studio fell completely silent. Even the camera operators seemed to freeze in place, unsure whether they should keep filming or start packing up their equipment. Graham Norton, the man who had made a career out of never being speechless, found himself genuinely at a loss for words. "I'm sorry," he said finally, his voice quiet but firm, "but I think you might have the wrong impression about what this show is. We're not a news program. We're not a political platform. We're entertainment. People tune in on Friday nights to have a laugh and forget about their problems for an hour." "And that's exactly the problem," Meghan shot back, her composure completely abandoned now. "Everyone just wants to laugh and forget while the world is burning." "Well, some of us can't forget. Some of us won't forget." Graham took a deep breath, and anyone who knew him well could see that he was drawing on every ounce of his professional training to remain calm. "Look," he said, his tone becoming more serious. "If you want to talk about important issues, we can absolutely do that. But this hostility, this anger, it's not helping anyone. It's certainly not helping your cause, whatever that might be." "My cause?" Meghan's voice hit a pitch that made several audience members wince. "My cause is authenticity. My cause is refusing to play these stupid games that people like you have created. My cause is being real in a world full of fakes." The word fakes hung in the air like a slap. Graham's eyes narrowed slightly, and for the first time since the interview began, his famous smile completely disappeared. "People like me," he repeated slowly. "And what exactly does that mean?" Meghan seemed to realize she had crossed a line, but instead of backing down, she doubled down with the fervor of someone who believed she was fighting a righteous battle. "It means people who have built careers on being nice to everyone's face while secretly judging them. People who pretend to be supportive while really just looking for opportunities to tear others down. People who smile and laugh and act like everything is wonderful while contributing absolutely nothing meaningful to the world." The attack was so personal, so venomous, that it sucked all the oxygen out of the room. Graham Norton, beloved by millions, respected by his peers, and known throughout the industry as one of the genuinely good people in television, sat in stunned silence for what felt like an eternity. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried the weight of someone who had finally reached their breaking point. "I think," he said slowly, each word measured and deliberate, "that you need to take a step back and think about what you're saying. Because right now, you're attacking me, you're attacking my show, and you're attacking everyone who works incredibly hard to create something that brings joy to millions of people every week." Meghan opened her mouth to respond, but Graham held up a hand to stop her. "No," he said, his voice growing stronger. "You've had your say. Now it's my turn." The studio was so quiet you could have heard a pin drop. The audience sat frozen, witnessing something that felt historic in its intensity and awkwardness. "I've been doing this job for 20 years, Graham continued, his Irish accent becoming more pronounced as his emotions rose. 20 years of trying to create a space where people can come and be themselves, where celebrities can show their human side, where audiences can escape from whatever difficulties they're facing in their own lives." He paused, looking directly at Meghan with an expression that was equal parts disappointment and disbelief. "And in all that time, I have never, ever had a guest sit in that chair and attack me personally for simply trying to do my job." Meghan's face had gone through a remarkable transformation during Graham's measured response. The confident smirk had faded, replaced by something that looked suspiciously like the dawning realization that she had miscalculated badly. But instead of retreating, she seemed to double down on her position with the desperation of someone who had committed too fully to a losing strategy to back down now. "Your job?" she said, her voice cracking slightly. "Your job is to ask softball questions and make everyone feel comfortable, so they'll keep coming back to sell their movies and books. That's not journalism, Graham. That's just extended advertising." Graham's expression shifted from hurt to something approaching pity. He had seen many celebrities self-destruct over the years, but never quite so spectacularly or so unnecessarily. "You're absolutely right," he said quietly. "This isn't journalism. I never claimed it was. This is entertainment. This is a place where people come to have fun, to share stories, to connect with audiences in a relaxed setting. And if that's not good enough for you, if that's beneath your standards, then perhaps you shouldn't have agreed to be here." The words landed like physical blows. Meghan's mouth opened and closed several times without any sound coming out, like a fish gasping for water. The audience could sense that something fundamental had shifted in the dynamic, that the hunter had somehow become the hunted. "I came here because I thought you were different," she finally managed, but her voice lacked the conviction it had carried just minutes earlier. "I thought you might actually want to have a real conversation instead of just going through the motions." "A real conversation?" Graham's eyebrows shot up, and there was genuine incredulity in his voice now. "Is that what you call this? Because from where I'm sitting, this feels more like an ambush. You came on my show with an agenda, and that agenda seems to be tearing me down for reasons I honestly can't fathom." The production team behind the cameras were frantically signaling, trying to figure out whether to cut to commercial or let this train wreck continue to unfold in real time. Graham caught sight of their frantic gestures and made a decision that would become legendary in television history. "You know what?" he said, standing up from his chair for the first time since the interview began. "I think we're done here." The words hit the studio like a thunderclap. In 20 years of hosting, Graham Norton had never walked out on a guest. He had weathered drunk celebrities, hostile politicians, and prima donna movie stars. But he had always maintained his professional composure and seen the interview through to its conclusion. Meghan's eyes went wide with shock. Whatever game she thought she was playing, this was clearly not the outcome she had expected. "You're walking out on me?" she said, her voice rising to a near shriek. "You're actually walking out?" "No," Graham replied, his voice deadly calm. "You walked out on this interview the moment you decided to turn it into a personal attack. I'm just making it official." He turned to address the audience directly, his natural showmanship taking over even in this unprecedented situation. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for what you've just witnessed. This isn't what any of us signed up for tonight. We'll be right back after these messages, and I promise we'll find a way to end the show on a more positive note." The audience erupted in spontaneous applause, a sound that seemed to surprise everyone, including Graham himself. It was clear that their sympathies lay entirely with their beloved host, and their clapping felt like a collective rejection of the behavior they had just witnessed. Meghan sat frozen in the red chair, apparently unable to process what was happening around her. The applause seemed to snap her out of her trance, and she finally found her voice again. "This is exactly what I'm talking about," she shouted over the applause, her composure completely shattered now. "This is how it really works. The moment someone tells the truth, the moment someone refuses to play along with the charade, they get silenced." But her words fell on deaf ears. The audience had made their choice, and it wasn't her. Graham paused at the edge of the stage, turning back one final time with an expression that managed to be both sad and dignified. "The only person who silenced you tonight was yourself," he said simply. "You had a platform, you had an audience, and you chose to use both to spread negativity instead of the positive message you claim to believe in. That's not my fault. That's not the industry's fault. That's your choice." With those words, he walked off his own stage, leaving Meghan sitting alone in the famous red chair that had welcomed thousands of guests over the years, but had never witnessed anything quite like this spectacular meltdown. The cameras continued rolling for a few more seconds, capturing Meghan's face as the full weight of what had just happened seemed to hit her. The confident woman who had walked onto the set just minutes earlier looked small and lost, surrounded by an audience whose excitement had turned to discomfort, and a production crew who were clearly scrambling to figure out how to salvage the rest of the show. Security personnel appeared from the wings, not aggressively, but with the quiet efficiency of professionals who understood that the situation required careful handling. They approached Meghan with the kind of diplomatic courtesy reserved for situations that could easily spiral even further out of control. "Ma'am, we're going to need you to come with us," one of them said quietly, his voice barely audible to the audience but picked up clearly by the sensitive studio microphones. Meghan looked around the studio as if seeing it for the first time, her eyes taking in the faces of audience members who had gone from excited fans to uncomfortable witnesses. The reality of what she had done, the bridges she had burned in less than 10 minutes of television, seemed to finally penetrate her awareness. She stood slowly from the red chair, her movements mechanical and uncertain. The woman who had entered with such confidence and purpose now looked like someone walking through a nightmare from which she couldn't wake up. "This isn't over," she said, but her voice lacked any real conviction. It sounded more like something she felt she should say, rather than something she actually believed. The security team guided her toward the exit with professional courtesy, and as she disappeared from view, the studio audience sat in stunned silence, processing what they had just witnessed. Many of them were already reaching for their phones, knowing they had just been present for a moment that would be talked about for years to come. In the control room, producers were making rapid-fire decisions about how to handle the remaining airtime. Graham Norton had built his reputation on being unflappable, but even he needed a few minutes to compose himself after such an unprecedented attack on everything he had worked to build. When the show returned from commercial break, Graham was back in his chair, his famous smile restored but carrying a weight that hadn't been there before. He addressed the camera directly, speaking to his audience with the honesty and warmth that had made him a beloved figure in British television. "Well," he said with a rueful chuckle, "that's certainly not how I planned to spend my Friday evening. Sometimes things don't go according to script, and I think we all just learned that lesson together." The audience responded with another round of supportive applause, their loyalty to their host unwavering despite the chaos they had just witnessed. And somewhere in the building, Meghan Markle was learning the hardest lesson of her career: that authenticity without kindness is just cruelty, and that burning bridges rarely leads anywhere worth going.